Judith, chapter 1. In the 12th year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, who reigned in Nineveh, the great city, in the days of Arphaxad, which reigned over the Medes in Ecbatana, and built in Ecbatana walls round about of stones, hewn 3 cubits broad, and 6 cubits long, and made the height of the wall 70 cubits, and the breadth thereof 50 cubits, and set the towers thereof upon the gates of it, 100 cubits high, and the breadth thereof and the foundation 60 cubits. And he made the gates thereof, even gates that were raised to the height of 70 cubits, and the breadth of them was 40 cubits, for the going forth for his mighty armies, and for the setting in array of his footmen. Even in those days King Nebuchadnezzar made war with King Arphaxad, in the great plain, which is the plain in the borders of Ragu. And there came unto him all they that dwell in the hill country, and all that dwelt by Euphrates, and Tigris, and Hydaspes, and the plain of Arioch the king of the Elameans. And very many nations of the sons of Kelod assembled themselves to the battle. Then Nebuchadnezzar king of the Assyrians said unto all that dwelt in Persia, and to all that dwelt westward, and to those that dwelt in Cilicia, and Damascus, and Libanus, and Anti-Libanus, and to all that dwelt upon the coast, and to those among the nations that were of Carmel, and Galaad, and the higher Galilee, and the great plain of Esdraelon, and to all that were in Samaria, and the cities thereof, and beyond Jordan unto Jerusalem, and Betana, and Kelus, and Cades, and the river of Egypt, and Taphnes, and Ramesses, and the land of Gesem, until you come beyond Tanis and Memphis, and to all the inhabitants of Egypt, until you come to the borders of Ethiopia. But all the inhabitants of the land made light of the commandment of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians. Neither went they with him to the battle, for they were not afraid of him. Yea, he was before them as one man, and they sent away his ambassadors from them without effect and with disgrace. Therefore Nebuchadnezzar was very angry with all this country, and sware by his throne and kingdom that he would surely be avenged upon all those coasts of Cilicia, and Damascus, and Syria, and that he would slay with the sword all the inhabitants of the land of Moab, and the children of Ammon, and all Judea, and all that were in Egypt, till ye come to the borders of the 2 seas. Then he marched in battle array with his power against King Arphaxad in the 17th year, and he prevailed in his battle. For he overthrew all the power of Arphaxad, and all his horsemen, and all his chariots, and became lord of his cities, and became unto Ecbatana, and took the towers, and spoiled the streets thereof, and turned the beauty thereof into shame. He took also Arphaxad in the mountains of Ragu, and smote him through with his darts, and destroyed him utterly that day. So he returned afterward to Nineveh, both he and all his company of sundry nations, being a very great multitude of men of war. And there he took his ease, and banqueted, both he and his army, 120 days. Chapter 2. And in the 18th year, the 22nd day of the 1st month, there was talk in the house of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, that he should, as he said, avenge himself on all the earth. So he called unto him all his officers and all his nobles, and communicated with them his secret counsel, and concluded the afflicting of the whole earth out of his own mouth. Then he decreed to destroy all flesh that did not obey the commandment of his mouth. And when he had ended his counsel, Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, called Holofernes, the chief captain of his army, which was next unto him, and said unto him, Thus saith the great king, the Lord of the whole earth, Behold, thou shalt go forth from my presence, and take with thee men that trust in their own strength, of footmen 120,000, and the number of horses with their riders 12,000. And thou shalt go against all the west country, because they disobeyed my commandment. And thou shalt declare unto them, that they prepare for me earth and water, for I will go forth in my wrath against them, and will cover the whole face of the earth with the feet of mine army, and I will give them for a spoil unto them. so that their slain shall fill their valleys and brooks, and the river shall be filled with their dead, till it overflow. And I will lead them captives to the utmost parts of the earth. Thou therefore shalt go forth, and take beforehand for me all their coasts. And if they will yield themselves unto me, thou shalt reserve them for me till the day of their punishment. But concerning them that rebel, let not thine eyes spare them, but put them to the slaughter, and spoil them wheresoever thou goest. For as I live, and by the power of my kingdom, whatsoever have I spoken, that I will do by mine hand. And take thou heed that thou transgress none of my commandments of thy Lord, but accomplish them fully as I have commanded thee, and defer not to do them. Then Holofernes went forth from the presence of his Lord, and called all the governors and captains, and the officers of the army of Assur. And he mustered the chosen men for the battle, as his Lord had commanded him, unto 120,000 and 12,000 archers on horseback. And he ranged them as a great army is ordered for the war. And he took camels and asses for their carriages, a very great number, and sheep and oxen and goats without number for their provision, and plenty of victual for every man of the army, and very much gold and silver out of the king's house. Then he went forth, and all his power, to go before King Nebuchadnezzar in the voyage, and to cover all the face of the earth westward with their chariots, and horsemen, and their chosen footmen. A great number also of sundry countries came with them like locusts, and like the sand of the earth, for the multitude was without number. And they went forth of Nineveh 3 days' journey toward the plain of Bechteleth, and pitched from Bechteleth near the mountain, which is at the left hand of the upper Cilicia. Then he took all his army, his footmen, and horsemen, and chariots, and went from thence into the hill country, and destroyed Phud and Lud, and spoiled all the children of Rasis, and the children of Ishmael, which were toward the wilderness at the south of the land of Chelians. Then he went over Euphrates, and went through Mesopotamia, and destroyed all the high cities that were upon the river Arbanai, till ye come to the sea. And he took the borders of Cilicia, and killed all that resisted him, and came to the borders of Japheth, which were toward the south, over against Arabia. He compassed also all the children of Madian, and burned up their tabernacles, and spoiled their sheepcotes. Then he went down into the plain of Damascus in the time of wheat harvest, and burnt up all their fields, and destroyed their flocks and herds. Also he spoiled their cities, and utterly wasted their countries, and smote all their young men with the edge of the sword. Therefore the fear and dread of him fell upon all the inhabitants of the sea coasts, which were in Sidon and Tyrus, and them that dwelt in Sur and Okina, and all that dwelt in Jemnaan, and they that dwelt in Azotus and Ascalon feared him greatly. Chapter 3. So they sent ambassadors unto him to treat of peace, saying, Behold, we, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar the great king, lie before thee. Use us, as shall be good in thy sight. Behold, our houses, and all our places, and all our fields of wheat, and flocks, and herds, and all the lodges of our tents, lie before thy face. Use them, as it pleaseth thee. Behold, even our cities, and the inhabitants thereof, are thy servants. Come, and deal with them as seemeth good unto thee. So the men came to Holofernes, and declared unto him after this manner. Then he came down toward the sea coast, both he and his great army, and set garrisons in the high cities, and took out of them chosen men for aid. So they, and all the country round about, received them with garlands, with dances, and with timbrels. Yet he did cast down their frontiers, and cut down their groves, for he had decreed to destroy all the gods of the land, that all nations should worship Nebuchadnezzar only, and that all tongues and tribes should call upon him as God. Also he came over Astralaon, near unto Judea, over against the great strait of Judea. And he pitched between Geba and Scythopolis, and there he tarried a whole month, that he might gather together all the carriages of his army. Chapter 4. Now the children of Israel that dwelt in Judea heard all that Holofernes, the chief captain of Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, had done to the nations, and after what manner he had spoiled all their temples, and brought them to naught. Therefore they were exceedingly afraid of him, and were troubled for Jerusalem, and for the temple of the Lord their God. For they were newly returned from the captivity, and all the people of Judea were lately gathered together, and the vessels and the altar and the house were sanctified after the profanation. Therefore they sent into all the coasts of Samaria, and the villages, and to Bethhoron, and Belmen, and Jericho, and Kobah, and Esarah, and the valley of Salem, and possessed themselves beforehand all the tops of the high mountains, and fortified the villages that were in them, and laid up victuals for the provision of war, for their fields were of late reaped. Also Joachim the high priest, which was in those days in Jerusalem, wrote to them that dwelt in Bethulia, and Bethomestham, which is over against Esdraelon, toward the open country, near to Dothaim, charging them to keep the passages of the hill country, for by them there was an entrance into Judea, and it was easy to stop them that would come up, because the passage was straight, for 2 men at the most. And the children of Israel did as Joachim the high priest had commanded them, with the ancients of all the people of Israel, which dwelt at Jerusalem. Then every man of Israel cried to God with great fervency, and with great vehemency did they humble their souls, both they and their wives, and their children, and their cattle, and every stranger and hireling, and their servants bought with money, put sackcloth upon their loins. Thus every man and woman, and the little children, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem fell before the temple, and cast ashes upon their heads, and spread out their sackcloth before the face of the Lord. Also they put sackcloth about the altar, and cried to the God of Israel with all one consent earnestly, that he would not give their children for a prey, and their wives for a spoil, and the cities of their inheritance to destruction, and the sanctuary to profanation and reproach, and for the nations to rejoice at. So God heard their prayers, and looked upon their afflictions. For the people fasted many days in all Judea and Jerusalem, before the sanctuary of the Lord Almighty. And Joachim the high priest, and all the priests that stood before the Lord, and they which ministered unto the Lord, had their loins girt with sackcloth, and offered the daily burnt offerings, with the vows and free gifts of the people, and had ashes on their mitres, and cried unto the Lord with all their power, that he would look upon all the house of Israel graciously. Chapter 5. Then was it declared to Holofernes, the chief captain of the army of Ashur, that the children of Israel had prepared for war, and had shut up the passages of the hill country, and had fortified all the tops of the high hills, and had laid impediments in the champaign countries, wherewith he was very angry, and called all the princes of Moab, and the captains of Ammon, and all the governors of the sea coast, and said unto them, Tell me now, ye sons of Canaan, who this people is that dwelleth in the hill country, and what are the cities that they inhabit, and what is the multitude of their army, and wherein is their power and strength, and what king is set over them, or captain of their army, and why have they determined not to come and meet me, more than all the inhabitants of the west coast? Then said Achor, the captain of all the sons of Ammon, Let my lord now hear a word from the mouth of thy servant, and I will declare unto thee the truth concerning this people, which dwelleth near thee, and inhabiteth the hill countries, and there shall no lie come out of the mouth of thy servant. This people are descended of the Chaldeans, and they sojourned heretofore in Mesopotamia, because they would not follow the gods of their fathers, which were in the land of Chaldea. For they left the way of their ancestors, and worshipped the God of heaven, the God whom they knew. So they cast them out from the face of their gods, and they fled into Mesopotamia, and sojourned there many days. Then their God commanded them to depart from the place where they sojourned, and to go into the land of Canaan, where they dwelt, and were increased with gold and silver, and with very much cattle. But when a famine covered all the land of Canaan, they went down into Egypt, and sojourned there, while they were nourished, and became there a great multitude, so that no one could number their nation. Therefore the king of Egypt rose up against them, and dealt subtly with them, and brought them low with laboring in brick, and made them slaves. Then they cried unto their God, And he smote all the land of Egypt with incurable plagues, so that the Egyptians cast them out of their sight. And God dried the Red Sea before them, and brought them to Mount Sinai, and Kadesh Barnea, and cast forth all that dwelt in the wilderness. So they dwelt in the land of the Amorites, and they destroyed by their strength all them of Esabon, and passing over Jordan they possessed all the hill country. And they cast forth before them the Canaanite, the Pharisite, the Jebusite, and the Sychemite, and all the Girgashites, and they dwelt in that country many days. And whilst they sinned not before their God, they prospered, because the God that hateth iniquity was with them. But when they departed from the way which he appointed them, they were destroyed in many battles very sore, and were led captives into a land that was not theirs. And the temple of their God was cast to the ground, and their cities were taken by the enemies. But now they are returned to their God, and are come up from the places where they were scattered, and have possessed Jerusalem, where their sanctuary is, and are seated in the hill country, for it was desolate. Now therefore, my Lord and Governor, if there be any error in this people, and they sin against their God, let us consider that this shall be their ruin, and let us go up, and we shall overcome them. But if there be no iniquity in their nation, let my Lord now pass by, lest their Lord defend them, and their God be for them, and we become a reproach before all the world. And when Achior had finished these sayings, all the people standing round about the tent murmured. And the chief men of Holofernes, and all that dwelt by the seaside, and in Moab, spake that he should kill him. For, say they, he will not be afraid of the face of the children of Israel. For lo, it is a people that have no strength nor power for a strong battle. Now therefore, Lord Holofernes, we will go up, and they shall be a prey to be devoured of all thine army. Chapter 6. And when the tumult of men that were about the council was ceased, Holofernes, the chief captain of the army of Assur, said unto Achior, and all the Moabites before all the company of other nations, And who art thou, Achior, and the hirelings of Ephraim, that thou hast prophesied among us as today, and hast said that we should not make war with the people of Israel, because their God will defend them? And who is God but Nebuchadnezzar? He will send his power and will destroy them from the face of the earth, and their God shall not deliver them. But we, his servants, will destroy them as one man, for they are not able to sustain the power of our horses. For with them we will tread them under foot, and their mountains shall be drunken with their blood, and their fields shall be filled with their dead bodies, and their footsteps shall not be able to stand before us, for they shall utterly perish, saith King Nebuchadnezzar, Lord of all the earth. For he said, None of my words shall be in vain. And thou, Achior, and hireling of Ammon, which hast spoken these words in the day of thine iniquity, shalt see my face no more from this day, until I take vengeance of this nation that came out of Egypt. And then shall the sword of mine army, and the multitude of them that serve me, pass through thy sides, and thou shalt fall among their slain when I return. Now therefore my servant shall bring thee back into the hill country, and shall set thee in one of the cities of the passages. And thou shalt not perish till thou be destroyed with them. And if thou persuade thyself in thy mind that they shall not be taken, let not thy countenance fall. I have spoken it, and none of my words shall be in vain. Then Holofernes commanded his servants that waited in his tent to take Achior and bring him to Bethulia, and deliver him into the hands of the children of Israel. So his servants took him, and brought him out of the camp into the plain. And they went from the midst of the plain into the hill country, and came into the fountains that were under Bethulia. And when the men of the city saw them, they took up their weapons, and went out of the city to the top of the hill. And every man that used a sling kept them from coming up by casting of stones against them. Nevertheless, having gotten privily under the hill, they bound Achior, and cast him down, and left him at the foot of the hill, and returned to their lord. But the Israelites descended from their city, and came unto him, and loosed him, and brought him into Bethulia, and presented him to the governors of the city, which were in those days Ozias the son of Micah, of the tribe of Simeon, and Cabras the son of Gothoniel, and Carmis the son of Melchiel. And they called together all the ancients of the cities, And all their youth ran together, and their women, to the assembly. And they set Achior in the midst of all their people. Then Ozias asked him of that which was done. And he answered and declared unto them the words of the counsel of Holofernes, and all the words that he had spoken in the midst of the princes of Ashur, and whatever Holofernes had spoken proudly against the house of Israel. Then the people fell down, and worshipped God, and cried unto God, saying, O Lord, God of heaven, behold their pride, and pity the low estate of our nation, and look upon the face of those that are sanctified unto thee this day. Then they greatly comforted Achior, and praised him greatly. And Ozias took him out of the assembly unto his house, and made a feast to the elders. And they called on the God of Israel all that night for help. Chapter 7. The next day Holofernes commanded all his army, and all his people which were come to take his part, that they should remove their camp against Bethulia, to take beforehand the ancients of the hill country, and to make war against the children of Israel. Then their strong men removed their camps in that day, and the army of their men of war was 170,000 footmen, and 12,000 horsemen, beside the baggage, and other men that were afoot among them, a very great multitude. And they camped in the valley near unto Bethulia, by the fountain, and they spread themselves in breadth over Dothaim, even to Belmaim, and in length from Bethulia unto Chiamon, which is over against Estrelaim. Now the children of Israel, when they saw the multitude of them, were greatly troubled, and said every one to his neighbor, Now will these men lick up the face of the earth, for neither the high mountains, nor the valleys, nor the hills are able to bear their weight. Then every man took up his weapons of war, and when they had kindled fires upon their towers, they remained and watched all that night. But in the second day Holofernes brought forth all his horsemen in the sight of the children of Israel which were in Bethulia, and viewed the passages up to the city, and came to the fountains of their waters, and took them, and set garrisons of men of war over them, and he himself removed toward his people. Then came unto him all the chief of the children of Esau, and all the governors of the people of Moab, and the captains of the sea coast, and said, Let now our Lord now hear a word, that there be not an overthrow in thine army. For this people of the children of Israel do not trust in their spears, but in the height of the mountains wherein they dwell, because it is not easy to come up to the tops of their mountains. Now therefore, my Lord, fight not against them in battle array, and there shall not so much as one man of thy people perish. Remain in thy camp, and keep all the men of thy army, and let thy servants get into their hands the fountains of water, which issueth forth of the foot of the mountain. For all the inhabitants of Bethulia have their water thence. So shall thirst kill them, and they shall give up their city, and we our people shall go up to the tops of the mountains that are near, and will camp upon them to watch that none go out of the city. So they and their wives and their children shall be consumed with famine, and before the sword come against them, and they shall be overthrown in the streets where they dwell. Thus shalt thou render them an evil reward, because they rebelled, and meant not thy person peaceably. And these words pleased Holofernes and all his servants, and he appointed to do as they had spoken. So the camp of the children of Ammon departed, and with them 5,000 of the Assyrians, and they pitched in the valley, and took the waters, and the fountains of the waters of the children of Israel. Then the children of Esau went up with the children of Ammon, and camped in the hill country over against Dothaim. And they sent some of them toward the south, and toward the east, over against Ecrabel, which is near unto Chusai, that is upon the brook of Machmur. And the rest of the army of the Assyrians camped in the plain, and covered the face of the whole earth, and their tents and carriages were pitched to a very great multitude. Then the children of Israel cried unto the Lord their God, because their hearts failed, for all their enemies had compassed them round about, and there was no way to escape out from among them. Thus all the company of Ashur remained about them, both their footmen, chariots, and horsemen, 34 days, so that all their vessels of water failed in the inhabitants of Bethulia. And the cisterns were emptied, and they had not water to drink their fill for 1 day, for they gave them drink by measure. Therefore their young children were out of heart, and their women and young men fainted for thirst, and fell down in the streets of the city, and by the passages of the gates, and there was no longer any strength in them. Then all the people assembled to Ozias, and to the chief of the city, both young men and women and children, and cried with a loud voice, and said before all the elders, God be judge between us and you, for ye have done us great injury, in that ye have not required peace of the children of Ashur. For now we have no helper, but God has sold us into their hands, that we should be thrown down before them with thirst and great destruction. Now therefore call them unto you, and deliver the whole city for a spoil to the people of Holofernes, and to all his army. For it is better for us to be made a spoil unto them, than to die of thirst. For we will be his servants, that our souls may live, and not see the death of our infants before our eyes, nor our wives, nor our children to die. We take to witness against you the heaven and the earth, and our God and Lord of our fathers, which punishes us according to our sins, and the sins of our fathers, that he do not according as we have said this day. Then there was great weeping with one consent in the midst of the assembly, and they cried unto the Lord God with a loud voice. Then said Ozias to them, Brethren, be of good courage. Let us yet endure 5 days, in the which space the Lord our God may turn his mercy toward us, for he will not forsake us utterly. And if these days pass, and there come no help unto us, I will do according to your word. And he dispersed the people, every one to their own charge, and they went into the walls and towers of their city, and sent the women and children into their houses, and they were very low brought in the city.